Welcome to Grapplearts Radio.
Hey guys, it's Stephan Kesting on the Grapplearts Radio podcast. Today should be a lot of fun. We're going to go way back in time to the early days of jiu-jitsu, the early days of my jiu-jitsu. And we've got a special guest here who I've known forever. But first, listen, everyone says this. Everyone who's got a podcast says this, and that's because it's true. If you like this podcast, go to iTunes, leave a rating, and leave a review. Stuff like that helps so much, and doing that is really the single best way to get me to do more of these podcasts, to keep you entertained during your commute, during your workout, while you're walking around town. If you want to be listening to me interviewing people, go and leave a rating, leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. Plus, I'll be super grateful. So there. It's good for you, it's good for me, and it's good for the internet in general. So today, we're going to go back to 1994, when I first met today's guest, Jeff Meszaros. Jeff's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, Judo black belt.
Nope, Judo brown belt.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
And he's been around the MMA scene forever.
Yeah.
So hello, Jeff.
Hello to you. Yeah.
So we were just trying to figure out we met at the Megaton Jiu-Jitsu seminar in 1994.
Yeah, it was just after the first UFC. And I had switched from, because I started getting way back in my own bio, I started in Kung Fu when I was like 12. I did that till I was like 15. Then from 15 to I don't even know when, I did Taekwondo, I got a black belt in that. Then I did Hapkido. And I remember I think actually the reason...
So you're adept at kicking people in the head and breaking their fingers.
No, I never was adept. Taekwondo was terrifying for me because I could never kick people in the head. Imagine being in a kicking contest where you can only kick the body and head, but you can't kick the head, and your opponent can. It was Taekwondo was always
a little
terrifying.
bit predictable.
Yeah, but I kicked really hard to the body, but these guys wore these really thick chest protectors you see in the Olympics. Anyway, so the UFC came around, and I switched from Taekwondo to Hapkido.
Okay, so
and that was kind of like a Korean jiu-jitsu thing.
Yeah.
And what were you training at that time? Like Keiju Kenbo?
I was doing Keiju Kenbo, and I was doing. I moved to Vancouver, so I was doing a lot of judo at the time.
Yeah.
So the judo was the closest simulation of Brazilian jiu-jitsu I could do, and I was lucky in the sense that the club I was training at, I was deliberate, focused mostly on groundwork. Right? There's some judo schools that do more groundwork, some do more tachiwaza, some do more newaza. Right. This is one of the rare judo schools that did a ton of newaza, so I figured, that's pretty close to jiu-jitsu.
Right, yeah. And the Hapkido club I was at Hapkido is traditionally a mix of Aikido and Taekwondo, but the guys that were teaching it in North Vancouver, they'd added boxing, they'd added Muay Thai, and one guy had gone down to train with the Gracies and brought it back up, and he even added...
Wolf.
It was a guy that taught it to Dennis Wolf, who taught it to myself and whoever. And so I was training with Dennis Kang, who you know, and we were both at this Hapkido club, and just kind of like watching the UFC and watching whatever, and trying to rehash it in the club. And that's when Megaton Diaz came up. But that was before there were no jiu-jitsu clubs up here. Yeah. Like, there was guys in judo and guys in Hapkido and guys in other weird little traditional jiu-jitsu clubs that were grappling and trying to sort of figure it out. But, there was no... But now you throw a rock, you hit 3 jiu-jitsu clubs.
Yes.
Back then, in 93, 94, there was nobody. Which is why yourself, myself, Vlado, Dennis, Alan, there was a French guy that was one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We all got together anytime we could steal mat space.
Yeah, once a week we'd meet up and there'd be a different club every week.
Right. I remember we'd sneak into the one time we snuck into the judo club at UBC.
Yes.
We signed in. One time we went to a Taekwondo club by Metrotown where they forgot to lock the doors, so we just anywhere we could find mat space to roar around and sort of rehash jiu-jitsu. That's what we did, you know?
At least Alan and I called that the Uncle Willie's Grappling Association because after going there, we were all, young and poor students, essentially. Right. Yeah. We'd go out for Uncle Willie's, which is an all-you-can-eat, horrendous food buffet.
Yeah, the public chicken bin.
Yeah.
It's like free food poisoning. So anyway, and then that was when Megaton was first coming to town, Wellington, Megaton Diaz, who still competes in the Mundials. He's competed in every Mundial. And he came up to UBC and did a seminar, and I don't know if that was the first time we met, but that was one of the first times we met.
So we learned that jiu-jitsu is basically a very long warm-up and then a flying triangle.
Right. Yeah. Well, like I was saying, at that seminar, he did a horrendous warm-up, And then he did...
By horrendous, we mean long and difficult.
Long and difficult. Making sure the weak can't survive, And then it was flying triangle, attacking the turtle with like some kind of helicopter turnover. There was like a headlock escape. Didn't really piece together too well, but we didn't have any idea what we were doing. So anything that we could learn from this guy.
Yes.
And he brought up...
And then there was sparring.
Yeah, and there was lots of sparring. And then Jack McVicker came up for that, who's now like a black belt that fights all over the place. And some purple belt guy named Sharam, who I think was also a Jeet Kune Do guy. And
Well, at that time, we were just trying to get knowledge from anywhere. If that knowledge was from like the Joe DeMeo wrestling tapes,
right?
Throw that in. If it was from a judo book, we'd try it.
Yeah. We were all collecting VHS tapes and swapping VHS tapes.
Do you remember that guy? I think he was a medical student, and was a little bit richer than the rest of us. So he had gone and bought some like 18-volume Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu VHS set.
VHS, yeah.
And every time he'd come to an Uncle Willie's session, he'd show one technique from it, and could not for love nor money get more than one technique out of him because he wanted to maintain that status.
Right.
And he also would never in a million years lend or allow any copying. Right. So that was a secret little stash of money.
Yeah, yeah. The first VHS tapes I ever got were by a guy named Paul Ville, who probably isn't around anymore. And I don't think he had...
He was the world martial arts guy.
Yeah. And he eventually made good stuff, like with Mario Sperry and whoever, I think.
Yeah.
But I got those and I watched them.
But his personal stuff, there was a lot of... a lot of debate, shall we say.
Yeah.
And then there was always that the Bill Lewis guy who would do reviews
I remember
of the Paul Vielle videos.
Right.
And, crack out of any videos by World Martial Arts, 5 out of 5 stars, and he'd review other people, and they'd all be like 1 star. Yes, they made good stuff, but there was always that suspicion.
Yeah. So with that Megaton thing, I remember after the Megaton thing, he came to UBC once or twice, and then he did like a week-long thing, training 2 or 3 times a day at the club now is Posner's Pancration, And I remember that's where I was like an absolute white belt and just right from... And if you look at that picture, there's me, there's Tim Shears, there's a bunch of guys that... I think you were there once or twice, maybe.
Don't think so.
Oh, well. And I remember like Chris Franco was there, the Ellen's Franco Pancration and stuff. And it was like the early days of jiu-jitsu. Did you train with... Joao and Marco Vasconcelos when they were here?
No.
That was like in 95.
I met them, but that's it. Yeah. Once again, one was a purple belt, one was a brown belt. And it's like, oh my God, did you hear about there's a purple belt in town?
Right.
It's funny how, like you say, you throw a rock now, you hit 3 jiu-jitsu schools.
Yeah, right.
And then you hit the rock ricochets and hits 2 more karate schools, which now include, quote, jiu-jitsu as part of their curriculum.
For sure, yeah.
They've discovered that they have a wrist lock in their kata somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, this weird motion of the hand.
Yeah.
Actually, you're wrist locking somebody, therefore we're grapplers.
Yeah. And of course, there were no tournaments back then. Like, there were no tournaments. Mm-hmm. And now there's, sometimes there's 2 tournaments, 3 tournaments in the same day, So it's crazy. So you and I were I don't want to say the dirty dozen, but you and I were among the first couple dozen people to start doing jiu-jitsu here in Vancouver, more or less.
For sure. It and I never thought it would take off. I was convinced that it would not take off because I thought it would be way too hard on the ego.
Yeah.
And I thought you could continue doing kung fu. Kung fu would be popular because you could fool yourself that some technique works, right? You're doing like leap of the hidden dragon, heart-ripping technique, and you could practice that. And you'd never actually have the opportunity to find out that technique doesn't actually rip someone's heart out of their chest.
Well, that was the first martial art I did. Like when I was 12.
What kind of kung fu?
It's really funny. They called it Shaolin Kung Fu, and they showed us sort of like, that stuff where they touch the hot spear to their tongue and it doesn't burn them, and they push it into their... It was that kind of stuff. We didn't do like that stuff, but one of the techniques they taught us, I swear to God, they called it Monkey Steals the Magic Peach. And it was a way to like rend off somebody's testicles.
Right.
Another one was called, I think, Crane Steals the Grape, which was basically a poke in the eye.
Right.
But then the sparring was full-on Muay Thai. And you couldn't do any of that stuff. You can't rend the testicles or poke the eye. Now you're doing like Muay Thai sparring, but they've taught us no Muay Thai technique or strategy.
Right.
You know what I mean? So then it was just this weird...
People doing bad kickboxing.
I guess, man. It was nuts.
Well, it's funny how often that happens. I mean, I remember seeing guys who've trained in other like traditional martial arts for years, and they're really good at that martial arts equivalent of, rending the peaches or whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
And all of a sudden, they put on the gloves, they get hit in the face.
Right.
And, I just, the Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face.
Right. Yeah.
All of a sudden, all those peach stealing and grape eating goes out the window.
Yeah.
And you have people throwing haymakers.
Right. I remember I saw a capoeira guy that when he was just doing his capoeira looked great. But then we did a little stand-up sparring with him, and it just looked crazy, It looked insane. But anyway.
But you can move that technique into real
absolutely.
life.
Oh, absolutely.
There's
Don't mess with capoeira guys, man.
Well, there's that Thai boxer. I forget what his name is. It begins with an S. I'll remember it as soon as. Who basically does that standing on the hand, round kick.
Yeah.
And he's knocked a lot of people out.
Oh, yeah. When I was in Brazil, man, some of the baddest people I trained with, and I mean bad as in like Michael Jackson version of bad, like street tough kind of bad, not as in no skill, but I mean like scary skill, were guys that started off with capoeira and made their way into jiu-jitsu. And they were unsweepable. Yes. Like you try and sweep them, they're on their hand, they're back on their feet again.
Yeah.
Like Cobrinha came from capoeira and countless other cats.
I think if you look at it, not as a martial art per se, but as an attribute.
Right, attribute
combat gymnastics.
Yeah. In terms of full body strength, balance, explosivity, it's crazy. But but my point is, with this one cat, the fighting techniques he learned in capoeira, when he tried to do them in a kickboxing kind of way, it looked just insane. And it didn't play out too well for him.
Well, maybe that's a failure of the training method as opposed to a failure of the, there's only so much capoeira. A roda is like the capoeira dance. If he'd maybe done a little bit more sparring with actual contact.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Then,
look at the old, back in the day, the old jiu-jitsu versus whatever, Back in the day, there was a couple times a capoeira dude would kick a guy in the head, and that was the end of him. It was like Maestre Hulk versus somebody. I forget forget who the jiu-jitsu guy was. But back on point, not that we ever had a point, is
we are avoiding being on point today.
Back in the day, you thought that jiu-jitsu wouldn't catch on, but that's because back in the day, jiu-jitsu was different. Back in the day, jiu-jitsu was for not self-defense, but it was like cage fighting and real, I guess that is self-defense. It's like cage fighting, reality fighting, The first Worlds, I think, was it 93? I don't know. And the first Brazilian Nationals, I think, were 96, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the first Nationals was 93 and the first. But when I started jiu-jitsu, I did not think of it as a sport. The idea of there being points, the idea that there being takedowns,
It was a fight for your life.
It was a fight to the death. Yeah, it was how to win a fight to the death. You know what I mean? And when we watched stuff online, it was challenge matches. You know what I mean? Way back then. But now...
You don't mean online. You mean...
Oh, yeah. When we got the flickery VHS tapes. We started doing jiu-jitsu before there even was an online, It was crazy. And the stuff that we would get was we'd see Hoyler Gracie versus Eugenio Tadao, or Hickson versus Hugo Duarte, or Zulu, or whatever. And that's what we thought of jiu-jitsu. This was how to win a fight to the death, how to win a challenge match. Not that a challenge match is a fight to the death, but a fight to, the first person that gives up. And now there's that style of jiu-jitsu has to a certain extent been forgotten, and challenge matches have been replaced by sport jiu-jitsu, mixed martial arts, and I don't know, there's other stuff going on, the Eddie Bravo, EBI stuff, what have you, But the stuff that, the philosophy that we practiced under back in the day has to a certain extent been forgotten,
That being said, I think if you took, any top-level MMA guy now, and you put him back in one of those no-holds-barred challenge matches back then, they would certainly be able to
for sure,
to hand out the pain very effectively. It's because of the merging of striking and grappling.
Yeah,
right? In the old days, you were a striker or you were a grappler.
Right.
What style is this? He's a Shotokan karate specialist. He's a Wing Chun guy.
Yeah.
Ain't no pure stylist in the UFC now. Everybody knows how to, You've got Damian Maia, and he punches people on the ground. Does he only go for the armbar from mount? No, he punches people in the head.
Yeah.
So is he a grappler or a striker? Well, he's managed to merge those two fields very well.
My point is, back in the day, the way jiu-jitsu was back then, as you thought.
I mean, for the recreational player.
It's not going to catch on, but now it's there's stuff to catch on to. You know what I mean? This is a sport. People love sports. You know what I mean? This is, MMA is very popular now. Back in the day, mixed martial arts was for martial arts nerds that kind of want to see what's going to happen when you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's kind of turned into, not the WWE, but it has a much more mass appeal, So jiu-jitsu has caught on because it's become a popular sport. People see it in the UFC, these kinds of things. But
I often make the mistake when people meet me and they're like, oh, so, you do some kind of sport? Are we having this conversation? I introduce myself as a male pajama wrestler.
Right. I did,
And then, strangely, people usually get the wrong idea. They ask me, "Oh, I hear you have a website." You know, yeah, it's a website about male pajama wrestling.
Right.
And strangely, that doesn't really convey. You know, they get the wrong idea usually.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean,
Maybe there's an alternate niche site that I should open.
Male pajama wrestling.
Yeah.
Yes. You see if that URL is already taken.
Yeah.
But when I tell people I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they usually think I'm referring to capoeira. Like, oh, the dancing one. I'm like, no, not that one. Although that one's pretty, also cool. But then I say it's a little like wrestling. It's a little like judo. You throw the guy to the ground, then you have to continue to, wrestle with him. It's funny though because people will Google Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and sometimes the first thing they'll see now is two dudes sitting down. Yeah. And that's like
double guard pull.
Yeah, double guard pull, and then it to explain why that happens. Okay, can you explain to me why double guard pull? Why does that happen? Go!
Wow. Either two people have pulled guard at the same time, but now you got to explain the whole idea of pulling guard. Right. Why on earth would you want to pull guard?
Yeah.
Or the guy's got such a hard guard to pass that you're better off putting him in your own guard and then spinning to his back. Because if you manage to win the berimbolo battle, you'll end up on his back and you won't have to pass his guard.
Right. And these are the questions
But now to explain that to your, I don't know, your neighbor.
Who
just, I'm interested in doing some martial arts. What do you recommend? Well, if you're ever on the beach and somebody butt scoots towards you and then attacks you sitting on their butt with their feet pointing at you, have I got the martial art for you? They're usually not that intrigued by it.
Right. And that's the thing I was talking to a friend about the other day, how Jiu-Jitsu is like three islands that, due to tectonic plate movement, are sort of, maybe there's more than three, they're moving in separate directions. And the philosophies of each...
no gi, and sort of an MMA?
Well, I mean, there's MMA, there's sport, and then there's self-defense. And I guess the fourth one is challenge matches, because self-defense and a challenge match isn't the same thing. You know what I mean? Getting jumped in an alley and then agreeing to meet somebody in a spot, and, that's not the same thing. And there was a time when this was all the same thing. That's when you and I started. But now the philosophies are floating apart. Yeah, like I remember way back in the day, I learned that in jiu-jitsu, you want to be as calm as possible and wait for your opponent to get tired, Sure. But then just over the weekend, this last weekend, I was watching the Europeans, and it's totally the opposite. You want to be the first guy to do everything. You want to be the first guy to... They race to be the first guy to shake the hand of the referee. Like right off the starting blocks. They want to be the first guy to shake the referee's hand before the match even starts. And you're not conserving energy at all. You're like using your energy as much as you can.
But people have also started doing a ton more conditioning, right? And back in the day, there were very, very few professional jiu-jitsu athletes.
Right.
And certainly most people had a job or they were going to college or whatever.
Yeah.
Now you got a ton of people who are training, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
They're 21 years old. I don't know how they do it financially. But, maybe they're rich. Maybe their parents say, well, son, I want you to be a professional jiu-jitsu player or whatever.
Yeah.
But they're making sacrifices. They're living in some, hovel. But they're training 2 or 3 times a day. And so their level of conditioning is a ton higher than what the average jiu-jitsu guy used to be.
But the point is, in a fight with no time limit, it's more like a marathon.
Right.
And in a fight with a time limit and points, it's a sprint.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And those two things are going in separate directions. Or if you look at MMA, I mean, look at GSP. In his entire career, GSP's been in his back for, I think, 17 seconds.
Really?
Like, you don't want to be on your back in a mixed martial arts fight. But in sportive jiu-jitsu, as we were saying, you pull to your back immediately. So in terms of energy depletion, there's a philosophical difference. In terms of top or bottom, there's a philosophical difference. And different kinds of jiu-jitsu are floating in different directions, And those are the questions, like when I teach out in West Vancouver at the community center there. And my students say to me, oh, hey, Jeff, why has heel hook become such a prevalent, move in the Eddie Bravo Invitational, but we don't see heel hook that often in MMA? And I go, well, in EBI, there's no punching, and there's really no sense passing the guard, because why pass the guard to punch the guy from the mount if you can just fall back and heel hook him? It's super high percentage, And there's, how come you don't see heel hooks in sport jiu-jitsu? Well, sport jiu-jitsu wearing the kimono, it's often illegal, but, not in Naga or whatever, So these little changes to rules have giant effects on the strategies you employ in these different environments, all of which are called jiu-jitsu.
Right. Well, I mean, ultimately, there are only so many ways that two people can try and pin each other and grind your opponent into the mud.
Yeah.
But the little rule changes, people want to win.
Yeah.
They'll find a way to game it.
Yeah, exactly.
Any rule system. Look how often. I don't really follow football, but every time they change a rule there, all of a sudden it's in response to people gaming the system, and then there's new ways to game the system. Right. I mean, judo is a sport that we both have done.
Yeah.
And
they changed the rules again just lately. They changed them in 2010, and they changed them again just lately about stuff.
Yeah, like with a stroke of a pen, they got rid of anything where you're touching the legs, essentially.
Yeah. First, they made it that you can't hold the legs for very long. It has to be like one movement. Mm-hmm. So you could double leg a guy, but there couldn't be like hop, hop, hop finish. It had to be one clean takedown. And now, if you even touch the leg, even accidentally, you could get penalized. In France, a guy was doing a shoulder throw, ippon seiwanage, and he just tapped the knee to help the guy over, and they disqualified him, But the thing is, in jiu-jitsu, the BJJF, they haven't done that in quite some time. They messed a little bit with 50-50 guard, but there's nothing to do with pulling guard or berimbolo or any of that stuff. So jiu-jitsu, if you look at the world championships from, I think the first one was 96, and you look at the latest ones, it doesn't look similar at all. Back in 96, you see guys, some guys pulled guard, like Loretta or whoever, Roletta, sorry, But now, like, everybody's pulling guard. Though in the lower weight classes, the higher you go in the weight classes, the less likely you see, a guard pull, But, and like I said before, why do people pull guard? Because if you've been working on your judo, I'll just negate that by sitting down. All the time you spent throwing now is out the window. And now you have to try to pass my guard, which is unreal because it's all I've been working on. So you sit down and use your guard against mine. Mm-hmm. Both of us have impassable guards. So we start doing berimbolo to kind of come up on the guy's back. It's shortcuts to the gold medal, And there's no rules saying they're illegal. So, people do them,
Mm-hmm. And then by banning leg locks, or functionally banning most effective leg locks,
right?
You're preventing that avenue of response to, sitting down and playing open guard.
Yeah. Well, you can't do, heel hook or reverse heel hook. I mean, in the IBJJF, you can do toe hold and knee bar and stuff. But in Eddie Bravo, the EBI, or in the ADCC, for example, you can do heel hooks. So those are by far the highest percentage winning moves. Yeah. People don't even bother.
Heel hook and rear naked choke.
Yeah, like if you look at Gordon Ryan or whoever in the EBIs, or Eddie Cummings, he just walks towards you, sits down, gets your foot, and heel hook. He just heel hooks his way to the win.
See, in the defense of the tectonic plates still being relevant to one another, in a self-defense situation, I think there's a certain logic to Eddie Cummings' strategy. If he were to jump on someone's leg and rip their ACL, their MCL, and their meniscus to shreds in 3 seconds, which is about how long it would take, not too much bad stuff's going to happen to him in 3 seconds.
No, absolutely. Yeah. But that gets back to another thing I've been thinking about. What's the difference between self-defense and, like, assault? Isn't self-defense like...
if you're trying to assault somebody or they're assaulting you?
Well, I mean... like back in the day, if I walk up to a dude on the beach and I smack him in the face and then we fight.
Now it's a consensual fight.
Well, a smack in the face might even be assault. You know what I mean? Mm. But like people ask me all the time, hey, what's the best martial art for self-defense? And I say triathlon. Jump in the water, swim away, get out of the water, ride your bike away, and then run like the wind. If you look at the animals and stuff around the world, most of them run like the frickin' wind, or they're tortoises or something. They just, you can't get me, a wombat.
So you're advocating pulling turtle in a self-defense situation.
I don't know, man.
Here you have it, people. The right move, if someone pulls a knife on you, is do turtle.
Yeah, well,
maybe not.
I guess I think a lot about right and wrong, good and bad, philosophy, strategy, and how, sometimes a jiu-jitsu club will have self-defense in the window, and you go in there, and the first thing they're showing you is to immediately sit down and heel hook. And it's like, well, I don't know if that's great for certain sportive applications and stuff, but in terms of self-defense,
have you seen...
I don't know.
Have you seen any of that? Well, you missed an area. You missed team combat. Have you been watching any of those crazy Russian team MMA videos?
I think I saw one where it was like in a field in Bulgaria or something, where it's crazy, But again, when you have a group of people fighting a group of people in a forest, I guess that might fall under a loose self-defense definition, but that's tribal warfare now. That's a separate issue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I was sitting down the other day. Like I've not given this a ton of thought, but if you were the captain or the coach for a 5-man MMA team for these, if people haven't seen it, if you Google Team MMA Russia, you'll see crazy videos where 5 guys are fighting 5 guys. Sometimes they're in a ring with like obstacles. Sometimes they're in a forest. Often they're over way quick. Like we're talking 45 seconds, and 4 guys or 5 guys are unconscious, and then 3 guys, 3 victors.
And it also it depends on the surface upon which they're fighting. Like I have seen solo MMA happen on I don't want to say on a beach, but it's in like a field that is sand, and they immediately get sand in their eye. Both guys immediately like, oh, just a second, and they're like trying to fish like a grain of sand out of their eye. I've seen it happen on sand. I've seen it happen in the forest where there's like pointy sticks and bushes and stuff. And I think I saw one where like they
don't think participant safety is the first concern in these events.
And then the one I think to which you're referring that I saw was they sort of tried to recreate a kind of bus stop kind of environment out of like foam, and there's like a stop sign, and there's also sort of a medicine ball hanging on a rope, and you can swing it and attack people, and you can fall off things. Did you ever see Yama pit fighting?
Yes.
That was like the UFC, but at the very, very edge where the wall meets the floor, they would have a slightly sloped surface. And that changed everything because all you had to do was make a person walk backwards, and they didn't anticipate there being an angle behind them, and so they would just immediately fall down.
And the idea, I think, was to keep people off the cage.
Well, it didn't work at all. I mean,
you just push people against the rise.
Yeah, it just made
Oleg Tartaro fought.
Oleg Tartaro fought, and he fought Mark Kerr, and he knee-barred Mark Kerr. And then Travis Few fought in that, and a bunch of other guys, Chris Tucher, I think.
Okay, but back to this team fighting.
But my point, before we go back to that, the environment changes. The smallest change to the environment has a huge effect on what the outcome is. The smallest change.
There are UFC guys who pay attention to where in the octagon they stand.
Absolutely,
because some parts are less slippery than others. Like the areas where there's paint is a bit less slippery than the other areas. So they're coming down to, I don't know, playing with a coefficient of friction of their feet against the mat.
Right, yeah. Matt Hughes, when he fought in the UFC, he would find the hardest spot because under the mat there would be like crossing bars to elevate, keep the surface.
And slam the guy down?
And he would slam the guy on the hardest spot.
I had no idea.
He would go into the octagon beforehand, and he would find the hardest spot where he can slam the guy the hardest. Because you don't want to slam the guy where there's maximum bounce. What are you doing that for, So again, it's your environment, not just what you're wearing, gi or no gi. It's what you're standing on, the surface. Can you imagine if you got in a fight with a guy like on a set of stairs or on an escalator?
Sure.
It'd be madness. Yeah.
Or, we just went through a real icy period here.
Right, yeah.
Like, good luck with your Taekwondo if you're on a sheet of ice.
Well, that's just it. And that's why there's certain martial arts. Like, I always have this little saying, have the tools to fit the rules. That's what
Right.
But back in the day, well, not back in the day, like, salat, pent jack salat or whatever, some kinds of salat are designed to fight people in tall grass, where there's a lot of like jumping. You got to get above the tips of the grass to crack a guy or whatever. Some kinds of salat are designed to fight a guy on like a slippery surface. Like if the rocks are all wet, like can you imagine getting in a fight with a guy on large rocks on the beach? And that's why they have one hand on the ground and they're kind of squatting. And people look at it and and now the salat guy is showing that in like on a
in a dojo.
In a dojo. People are like, why the hell would you squat and put your hand on the ground? Why all the jumping? Yeah. But then, you got to fight a guy in tall grass on slippery rocks or in like knee-deep mud or something, and all of a sudden you're standing in waist-high water pulling guard. Doesn't seem like a great idea. That sounds like drowning to me, And
we're not even talking about the presence of weapons.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Again,
changes everything,
I am determined to get a coherent strategy out of you so you're now the captain of a Russian 5-man MMA.
All right.
You're either the captain or the coach. What's your strategy? I was trying to figure this out. It does seem like
biting.
Five guys. No, you're not allowed to bite.
Eye gouge.
You're not allowed to eye gouge.
Weapons.
No weapons. No.
What are we standing on? Sand, water, mud.
Let's, for the sake of argument,
smooth rocks.
Let's say you're either on a grassy field or in some kind of super large octagon or boxing ring.
And is there any kind of containment?
Yes.
There's walls, trees, a cliff.
Sharks. A shark-filled moat.
Push them into the moat. That's easy. Done. Okay. Next question.
All right, you're not. It seems from having watched a number of these that basically people square off, and the first team to swing it from 5-on-5 to 5-on-4,
Right.
almost inevitably gets the victory.
Right.
Because then you can go 2-on-1,
Yeah.
take a guy out super quick. Now you can go 2-on-1 times a couple of guys, or 3-on-1.
5 is more than 4.
Yeah.
So I would say, as 5 guys, you group attack the smallest guy. You know what I mean? All 5 of you group attack the smallest dude. And then from there, now you've taken that cat out. You have 5 guys. There's 4 of them left. Now address the, you know what I mean? That's what I would suggest. But I don't have any experience in that particular, ask John Danaher that question. You know what I mean? He's really good at finding the tiny little loopholes in rule books and exploiting them. You know what I mean? Like his guy, Gordon Ryan, or whomever, they do very well in the EBI back in the day. GSP, they've realized that, okay, this is the highest percentage likelihood of winning, And so the highest percentage likelihood of winning in team-on-team MMA, like you said, you want to be the first team to have a superior number, so do whatever you can to...
So that's what I'm wondering. Maybe, if 5 guys jump to heel hooks right away, flying heel hook, if that was your out-of-the-door strategy.
But striking is involved, you know what I mean? And when striking is involved, sometimes, unless you're Toquinho...
But it typically takes more time punching to take somebody out.
Plus, they're possibly wearing boots. Yeah. You know what I mean? And if you're wearing really, I don't know.
I think it's a strategy that might work the first time, might not work the second time.
Yeah. But the thing is that for every strategy there has to be a test period, and over time you develop it. Like. In the UFC or MMA, for example, over time, they've noticed that, you're more likely to win by TKO than by submission. So if you mount a guy, don't fall for an armbar. The dude might come up in your guard. Just crack him and yell at the referee, he's out, he's out, he's out. Even if he's not out, just yell that at the referee, and the referee might stop it. You know what I mean? Or look at Roy Nelson, big country. He counts the shots. 1, 2, 3. He's looking at the ref, just counting the shots. And the idea of
number of unanswered shots.
Yeah, and the idea of rolling for a triangle or what have you, it's insanity,
Under that rule set.
Yeah, and again, or even in sport jiu-jitsu, when I haven't fought in sport jiu-jitsu in some time, but I referee all the time, and people in Brazil especially use submissions as either a...
advantage getter.
Well, either, an advantage getter, or when you don't legitimately try to submit your guy unless you are way down on points and you got to pull the goalie to win, or you're so totally ahead on points that now it's just kind of comical. You know what I mean? Because the few times not few, but the times I've fought in jiu-jitsu, my thing is I want to submit this guy. And when you're fighting a guy that is just going after the points and is working the time and stuff, their strategy is sometimes... more well thought out than your own,
Mm-hmm. Well, any system of rules, people are going to game it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I think about a lot, is that anytime you're using jiu-jitsu, there's rules involved. And if it's a street fight, okay, there's no rules. But that's still a set of conditions under which you have to sort of understand, am I on a staircase? Am I holding a hot cup of coffee? What kind of pants am I wearing? You know what I mean? Who is this person? How badly do I want to hurt them? There's a huge difference between getting attacked by a stranger in an alley and then your drunk uncle starts pushing you around at a family barbecue.
That's exactly the point that I just made on my self-defense tutorials video YouTube channel that I started, which is, eye gouging, grabbing somebody by both ears, biting their nose off and then eye gouging them. Could be an appropriate response under some conditions. Right. But your drunk uncle, that, and I probably got that example from you, you would be somewhat ostracized by your family after, removing your uncle's nose with your teeth. Yeah, no kidding. You're not going to go to any more family barbecues.
And that's the thing is, you also have to think of what country are you in? What kind of legal framework do they have to charge you? What's the likelihood of you being charged? In Japan, for example, I have heard that 95% of crimes, they get someone and you go to court. But in Brazil, it's more like 5%. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or in South Sudan, it's probably 0%. Yeah. So if someone starts messing with you, someone's going to kill you in South Sudan, bite off their ear, stab them with a stick, and get out of there. But if you're in a drunk uncle situation in Canada, maybe don't gouge his eyes. Yeah. Maybe that's a bad idea. And that's one of the beautiful things about jiu-jitsu is it's got a dimmer switch. You know what I mean? You choose how badly you want to mess this person up. Drunk uncle, you can tackle him, mount him, and just kind of slap him and say, okay, come on, Uncle Larry, let's just have some more macaroni salad. You know what I mean? But in a fight to the death kind of situation, okay.
You could mount him and eye gouge him.
You could mount him, eye gouge him, take his back, choke him to death, what have you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things about jiu-jitsu that I think is really good is that it's not a gun, shoot the guy or not. You take control of the cat and you see, you choose how badly
you have a continuum of response within the same art.
You know what I mean? So if you end up in front of a judge, you can like explain why you did what you did. As opposed to like, he pushed me, so I bit off his nose and I gouged him to death. What? Yeah. That's a problem, So.
Well, the point about the legal environment, I mean, the last confrontation I was in, I got involved. There was this super drunk tourist in Mexico abusing the staff of the hotel I was staying at. And I tried to explain to the guy that what he was asking was unreasonable and here's how to get what you want. And the guy turned on me and started coming towards me and... so I stood up. Yeah. And so he was closing the distance. He was posturing. He was chin up. And my first thought was...
Chin up? Wow.
Oh, he was trying to puff himself up, make himself look big. And my first thought was, punch him in the throat. And then I was like, no.
Punch him in the throat, okay.
No, I'm in Mexico.
Yeah, right.
That could kill him.
Yeah.
And my kids are up in the room.
And he was a Mexican guy?
No, he was an American.
Oh, he was an American.
He was American. He was an American abusing the Mexican staff.
I see. Okay.
And then my second thought is, okay, I'm going to kick his legs out. And then knock him out with a mount. And then I was like, no, he could hit his head on the marble floor. Right. Yeah. I could kill him. Yeah. I'm going to end up, spending time in a Mexican prison. Don't want that.
Yeah.
And then this is all in the space of, 2 seconds. I'm going, then I'm like, arm drag him, rear naked choke, keep him between myself and his enraged girlfriend.
Yeah.
And put him unconscious. Like, yeah, that's a fairly safe option. But in the process, I stood up and I was a little bit taller than him. And I think more importantly, he saw that I wasn't afraid. I wasn't intimidated. My main concern was, how do I not end up in prison? Right. And so he backed down. It was actually kind of funny. He kept on beaking like, yeah, you better watch your ass. He's going to fucking kill you. Fucking. All the same time, he's backing out the door.
Right. Yeah.
So okay, let him go. Yeah. But the fact we were in Mexico made a big difference.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't want to end up in a Mexican prison.
Did I tell you the story of the time I nearly got in a fight with a midget in Brazil?
No, you've not told me the story of the fight. Well, the time
I'll tell it, and if you want to...
You mean little person in Brazil.
Okay, great. Is midget, is that not an okay term?
It's not an okay term.
Really?
I am the PC police.
Really? You can't say midget?
You can say whatever you want.
Man, I didn't know that. I thought that was okay. Whatever. So I write a little blog, jeffjitsu.com. All the crazy stories I tell, you can read about it on there, but I'll just tell it anyway. So here's the situation. I'm on a bus, okay? And I'm going from Ouro Preto in Brazil to Sao Paulo. And I'm on an overnight bus, right? And I get on the bus, and sitting in the seat in front of me is a little person. And he's already just as drunk as a little person can be.
Game of Thrones has taught us that this is a common thing for little people.
Really? Okay, great. Anyway, and he's having a party, but it's only like 9 or 10 o'clock. I'm like, okay, great. He can, he's got music playing. He's got like a boom box. He's got onion rings. He's got cans of beer littered everywhere. He's made like a nest in the seat in front of me, right? I'm like, okay, whatever. It's Brazil. We're all here to have a good time. No problem. But still, the hours go by. Now it's midnight. Now it's 1. Now it's 2. And his party's just ramping up. And this is a solo little person party. There's no other little people. This isn't like Keebler elves getting together to celebrate a good batch of cookies have been made. No, it's not that. It's one guy. And he's drunk as hell. And now it's like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And everybody else on the bus, all Brazilians, have gone to sleep because that's just something they're able to do.
Brazilians are able to sleep with a lot of music.
Yeah, a lot of noise. And I can't.
They survive Carnival.
There you go. But me being a touchy Canadian, I can't sleep. So I say to the guy in my terrible Portuguese, I say, oh, would you mind, turning off your music? I'm trying to sleep. I'm really sorry, por favor, mais silencio. I don't know what I said, And at first he's like, okay, really sorry, whatever. But then he continues to get drunk. He doesn't, cranks it up more and more and more. And I say to him in a less polite way this time, caraca, which is like swearing in Portuguese somehow. Caralho, I don't know the word. I don't know what that means, but caraca and caralho in Portuguese both mean bad things. And I sort of yell at him.
That's an explicit rating for the podcast in Brazil. Thanks.
Okay, edit that part out. Anyway, so I say to the little guy something more rude, and I say, dude, turn it down. And at that time the bus stops. It's now time to get out and have the bus is getting gassed up. We're all having our 4 a.m. snack. And the little guy, when we get off the bus, he wants to throw down. He bunches up his fists, and he's like, você vai, you want to go, he's saying to me. And I'm thinking, man, I could, kick this drunk little dude in the head and probably end his life. Probably. And maybe go to jail. And have you seen videos on Brazilian jail? They're not good.
No.
Yeah, by comparison, Mexican jails get a glowing 5-star review. We're compared to Brazilian jails, where they pass around a bag of spaghetti that everybody has to eat out of, and then you all shit in the plastic bag. Sound like a good time? That's what I'm thinking of as I'm squaring off against this little midget.
It's pretty much Batman Rising,
Yeah, right. It's a pit. It's a pit. Right, exactly. Except everybody's...
Dark Knight Rises.
There you go. Everybody's pooping in a bag that was full of spaghetti noodles a moment ago. And maybe you're getting knifed. Have you seen the videos about the street fight that happened?
The riot?
Yeah, and see, that kind of stuff's going through my head. So I'm deciding, you know what? I'm going to give this guy a bye. Not going to kick him in the head. I just get back on the bus. But then I notice this midget, this little person, he's friends with the guy that's like the bus security guy. Because I guess he makes this trip all the time. You know what I mean? And the bus security guy and this midget, they're like laughing and clapping on the back. And I'm thinking, my God, like this midget has an in with bus security. And now it's like 5 a.m. and my mind's going a little bit sideways. So I'm thinking, what if he's meeting other little people in Sao Paulo? And when I get off this bus, he's going to tell other little people what happened. And now I got to fight, 10, 11, 12 midgets. What's going to happen? And so now in my head, the same way I'm devising strategies, have the tools to fit the rules. What do you do when you're fighting 12 little people in Sao Paulo? What do? Run the fuck away.
Triathlon. Self-defense by triathlon.
Jump in the water, swim away, ride a bike. Yeah, run away. See what I mean? That's self-defense. I'm not dropping to pull a heel hook on a Keebler elf when he's got 11 more Keebler elves with little spoons to stick in my head. I am fleeing.
That's very wise.
Yeah.
So when you actually arrived in Sao Paulo, everything was good?
Everything was fine. Yeah. I think he got off the bus before we even got to Sao Paulo. I think he stopped at a little city before Sao Paulo somewhere. Because I did eventually fall asleep. When I woke up, he was gone. As opposed to like slitting my throat as I lay unconscious on the bus. So I guess he got off, the Keebler Elf Town was before Sao Paulo somewhere, and he got off there, and and that was the end of it. So as with many of my stories, the hugely anticlimactic ending, where it's not, there's no big fight at the end at all. It's just all in my head,
How many times have you been to Brazil?
Twice. The first time was for 6 months, and the second time was for 3 more months. So, yep.
What was your day-to-day like there? Was it for jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, I hadn't really traveled, and then due to a series of unfortunate events, I had the opportunity to travel. You know what I mean? I found myself...
Is that code for having to leave the country?
No. But I lost my job, broke up with my girlfriend, who I'd been seeing for some time, and then because of that, had to be rent. I couldn't afford the place I owned, so I began renting it out. So I found myself unemployed, single, and homeless pretty quickly. You know what I mean? And I thought, this is a good time to travel.
The universe is trying to tell me something.
There you go. And I hadn't really traveled before at all. So I bought a ticket to Brazil, and I lived there for 6 months. And I trained at the various academies. I trained the first one. And the funny thing is, jiu-jitsu academies in Rio de Janeiro, where I went, they're all very hard to find. There's no
I've heard this from other people.
For some crazy reason. There's no street signs. They're all behind walls. You have secret codes, a secret knock to get through the door and stuff. It's insane. It's like trying to find like an underground gambling club or something. The first one I went to...
The first rule of jiu-jitsu club is don't talk about jiu-jitsu.
Right. Yeah, honestly, it's insane. The first one I found was Brazilian Top Team, which is near Lagoa. And that one is like, you have to like walk up to like a booth with guards in it that have guns and tell me, and then they open a gate, and then you're walking, there's like a walled compound, you're walking past swimming pools through trees, and then there's like an unlabeled set of stairs. It's like, okay. And then I trained there for like a month, and then I found De La Riva, which is like at the bottom of a fitness facility, and Allianz is at the top of a fitness facility, I mean, I trained at Fight Zone, which is Checkmat. It is also in a fitness facility, but they're all hidden inside fitness facilities, totally unlabeled, So... And I trained at probably 4 or 5 different ones before I settled on training at Fight Zone in Copacabana with Ricardo Vieira. A super nice guy. Like, to find a guy like Ricardo Vieira in a country like Brazil is incredible, Because down there, man, you wake up every day and you think to yourself, okay, this could be the day I get stabbed to death. It's not like Canada where you can sleep on someone's lawn and in the morning they've made you an omelet and they're giving you a cup of coffee. You know what I mean? Down there... Every day you wake up, you have to entertain the idea that you're going to get shot or stabbed or whatever. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not, is it likely? No, but it's possible. Not like here in Canada, So to find a guy as nice as Ricardo Vieira and as like welcoming and considerate and his jiu-jitsu is brilliant, to find someone like him was like a blessing. And because of that guy, I won gold at the World Cup in the Masters category, and then I got bronze at the Brazilian Nationals, again in the Masters category. And had I not come across that guy and his strategies and concepts and his help, I wouldn't have won those, you know? And now those are the two proudest achievements of my competitive jiu-jitsu career, you know?
Did you do much traveling in Brazil other than that? Or
Well, after I won those medals, I decided...
Other than bus trips to Sao Paulo?
Well, I went up to Salvador. I was in Ouro Preto. I went to Sao Paulo. I got this tattoo I have on my arm, which you can't see with the podcast. Got that in Sao Paulo. I went to Ilha Grande. I went to Paraty, which is kind of like where pirates used to hang out, you know.
So what advice would you have for people going to Brazil to train jiu-jitsu for the first time? Say they're going for a month. What would you tell them?
Don't go for a month. Go for 3 months. Yeah, go for a while. Because when you first go there, my first month when I was training in Fight Zone, you know, my second or third month, the Brazilians were laughing. You're still here, Jeff. That first month, we were trying to kill you. You know what I mean? Because they consider you a gringo for the first while you're there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so when I started training at these different academies, each time you have to kind of like get over that gringo wave when they accept you, you know? And for that first month, they think of you as a gringo.
Yeah, and just target practice.
Well, and some of them just sort of ignore you, and some of them decimate you. Like just, they don't injure you. Like they don't physically injure you, but they just absolutely decimate you, you know? And the only people that you can have sort of non-competitive roles with are like the other gringos, which is everybody who's not from Brazil.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you're going to Brazil to train, man, I mean, a month is okay. Plus you got to acclimatize. There's like, you know, jet lag and stuff. You got to find the club, which could take you like a week, you know? So if you're going to Brazil to train, go for 3 months, because that way you can like acclimatize to the place, get over your jet lag, you can make some friends, and then they take you under their wing, or they can help you, you know? And then then that's when you're learning the real jiu-jitsu. Because down in Brazil, it's not just about technique. Yeah, you can learn technique here, you can learn technique there. It's about abilities, you know? And like, you can't learn to surf in a short amount of time. You know what I mean? You can't instinctively learn gripping and balance and when to say okay and when to, you know, say no, that's not going to happen. That takes some time to figure out, you know? So the first time I was down there was for 6 months.
I know some of the very top academies down there basically don't do much teaching, or basically do hardly any teaching. Yeah. It's mostly a sparring club.
Right, yeah. The highest levels, yeah. Like,
I don't know how they take, you know, maybe white belts don't go to those clubs, or maybe they have a separate intro class, but you know, you show up for class and it's sparring.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. The first time I was in Brazil, and of course, I'm speaking of personal experience. I'm sure other people who lived in Brazil or visited Brazil have had totally different experiences.
Sure.
And, you know, and this is just my
experience. Your podcast.
Well, whatever. It's your podcast.
Okay.
So when I went to Brazil the first time, and to a certain degree the second time, I didn't see a lot of adult white belts. White belt was a belt for kids. And you saw it, and they taught them a lot of technique. They taught them a lot of, like, how to, you know what I mean? And then blue belt and upward. With blue belt was mostly for teenagers, but adults were all like purple, brown, and black. And when you're purple, brown, and black, I mean, you're on the other side of the fence. You know what's up, you know? And you can just train. You don't need to learn a lot of technique. There's strategy and do this, don't do that, you know? So when I was down there, I saw the kids' classes had a lot of technique. And the kids' classes were white belts, yellow belts, orange belts, or some green belts that were basically monsters. Green belts that should effectively be brown belts, but they're 15 years old, you know? So I saw a lot of technique in the kids' classes. But as adults, like, your warm-up is walking to the academy, you know? And then you do a couple somersaults, and then it's like 90 minutes of hard rolling. And not just purposeless rolling, but positional, like it's your job to like, it's the first person to get 2 points, for example. Ricardo Vieira did a ton of that. The first person to get 2 points wins, the other person goes back on the wall, you know, like rolling with a purpose, rather than just sort of tumbling around and, you know, because in sport of jiu-jitsu, there's a purpose. You win points to win, you know? So it was very defined, very specific, and a lot of like specified goal rolling, you know, a ton of that.
It occurs to me that you started out this section about Brazil by talking about how incredibly dangerous it is and how you got to be prepared. Yeah. So I don't think we can leave this topic without you giving, you know, if you wanted to tell people a couple of things to keep them safe if they're doing the jiu-jitsu tour, what would be the top bits of advice? Take
nothing of value. You know, don't wear a watch. Don't take any jewelry.
Leave the iPhone 7.
Yeah, leave the iPhone 7 at home, because, I mean, it's mostly opportunistic crime. You know, like, for example, one time I was at the beach and someone was drowning and everybody went down to like the surf to watch the person drown or watch helicopters come to save them. And while everybody walked down to the beach, a couple little kids from the favela just ran up and down the beach and just took everything. And when people returned to their beach towels, they found the beach towel was gone, as well as everything else, you know? So when I say that Brazil is a dangerous place, yeah, I mean, some people might be after your kidneys, but most people are just poor people, some of them that have, and they can make, you know, for a month feed their family by stealing your watch, you know? So there's a lot of pickpockets, there's a lot of, you look away, you look back, your camera's gone, that kind of stuff, you know? So, but that being said, like, they're also, this is before the Olympics, I was down there. People get shot, you know? Just not on purpose, but just accidentally, because there's drug gangs versus drug gangs and stuff. Like, when I lived in Copacabana, from my apartment, I could see the favela, and, like, you know, I could hear gunfire sometimes. Like, you know how in Vancouver sometimes, we will, like, it's raining outside, so we wait for the rain to stop before we go out? I would hear gunshots from my window, and I would wait for the gunshots to stop before I go out, you know? And is it likely you're going to get in trouble? No, but it's possible. It's more possible than in Canada. You know what I mean? Is Brazil South Sudan? No, apparently South Sudan is the most dangerous place in the world, you know? But I mean, I think of the...
Consequently, the jiu-jitsu there is off the hook.
Yeah, exactly. No, the running away there is off the hook. The running away in South Sudan is unbelievable. But I think of the 40 most dangerous places in the world, I think like 17 of them are in Brazil. You know what I mean? So just bear that in mind and don't attract attention. Like when I was in Brazil, man, I would walk around with my black belt and my kimono slung over my shoulder, wearing board shorts, poor flip-flops, you know? Mm-hmm. And then if there's like a criminal watching whoever go by, I am not the guy they're going to choose.
You know, the target demographic.
Yeah, I am not the most likely, you know.
Your belt of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And I would see on the beach, like in Ipanema and stuff, I would see really chubby people with cameras that have lenses, 3-foot lenses on their cameras. And these chubby people with gold rings walking along, taking pictures. And like you can just see like the shadow people moving towards them. And that makes me sound like I'm out of my mind, obviously, but like, don't be that person. Don't be wearing the gold rings. Don't have the cameras, you know? Just don't be the most likely, you know what I mean? The easiest victim, and they'll leave you alone.
Yeah. I think generally as a rule of thumb, if you're, you know, carrying more than 1 month's average salary on your body in an easily snatchable form.
Right. Yeah,
pretty much any part of the world is going to get taken. It's just the average salary is a lot lower there. So, you know, maybe stealing your reading glasses will, you know,
I mean,
help feed somebody.
When I was down there, man, I would carry like 5 reais in my pocket, and that's about it. I wouldn't, and my black belt over my shoulder, and I would just walk around, you know? And I never had, I mean, one time a guy, he had his finger, I could see it was his finger, it was under his shirt, and he was pointing it at me. And he was trying to make it look like a gun, you know, but I could see the fingernail.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was like, that's clearly not a gun under your shirt. That's clearly your finger. And then he just went in his way. And another time I got surrounded by, you know, street kids and stuff, and I had to just basically run away, you know, from about 20 street kids, you know. But, you know, I mean, I've painted the picture of Brazil being an incredibly dangerous place, and it is for people who are stupid. But stupid people are in danger wherever they go. Just don't be stupid and you're fine.
You wander out into the middle of traffic, anywhere in the world, things are going to go badly.
Right, yeah. You know, I mean, Brazilians are lovely people and stuff, but, you know, if you're walking around with a giant gold watch on, some poor kid might snatch it off your wrist, you know? And why shouldn't he? To buy apples for his family, you know?
So you've been involved a fair bit in the MMA game peripherally and commentating on it.
Yeah.
And so what's the best gig you've had in that area?
The best gig? Well, I mean, years ago I did UFC predictions on the Underground or whatever.
Yeah, I remember those. Those were hilarious.
Wombat, yeah. That was before I knew any fighters and stuff. And then that sort of snowballed into writing for, like, the first website I wrote for was MMA Ring Report. I don't know if that still exists. And then I started writing for other magazines, other newspapers and stuff. And then somehow I ended up working for Bodog. And Bodog sent me to, and I was like,
everybody worked for Bodog
at some point,
a year.
Yeah. And so they sent me to Japan. They sent me to the Playboy Mansion. They sent me to, you know, all kinds of places. And that was by far the sweetest gig, you know.
Before they imploded.
Well, because what happened was the U.S. government made it illegal for banks to if you make a bet, you can't use the bank to send the money into Bodog or get the money out of Bodog, right? So, yeah, it basically fell apart and everybody got laid off and stuff. And then after that, I worked for...
They didn't bribe the right congressman, I suppose.
I guess. Yeah, and then after that, I did writing podcasts for Full Contact Fighter Radio for some time, But then I just got away from that and into jiu-jitsu and teaching jiu-jitsu and stuff, which is what I'm still doing. But the sweetest gig, to answer your question, was by far Bodog. I mean, they sent me to Japan with just like a limitless expense account, I didn't have a camera and I didn't have a translator, but I had a limitless expense account. So I just, lived like a king in Japan for a week.
You made it rain in Roppongi.
Yeah. And then they sent me to the Playboy Mansion, which I know everybody, it just blows their minds that I've visited the Playboy Mansion. Again,
it's for sale.
Is it for sale?
It's for sale.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Again, on my little silly blog, jeffjitsu.com, you can read all about my trip to the Playboy Mansion and how it was hugely unimpressive.
Really?
Oh, yeah, because of online pornography, fewer people are buying Playboy. So the income has gone way down, so they started renting out their backyard to whoever. And I guess Strikeforce rented the backyard of the Playboy Mansion.
Oh, I remember this.
Yeah, and then, I don't know if it was the main event or whatever, but Bill Mahood fought Bobby Southworth. Remember Bobby Southworth?
Yeah.
Bill Mahood?
Yeah.
They fought in the main event of that Strikeforce in the backyard of the Playboy Mansion, and they sold 1,000 tickets for $1,000 each. And I got sent there for free, And people think when you say Playboy Mansion that it's going to be like crawling with like ladies in bikinis. And it's just like, but it was 99% dudes, and not even like
not a good ratio,
and not happy dudes. They just were all kind of. And the thing is, they cut off the bar at like 9:30 or 10.
There were women in bikinis.
Yeah, right? And so, oh man, it was just so creepy. It was such a sausage party, and like the bar got shut down like 9 or 10 o'clock. So everybody had like 1 or 2 drinks, so they're not happy drunk. You're just kind of like you're a little bit kind of nauseated because of the 1 or 2 drinks you had, and it was crazy. It was crazy.
You've totally ruined my visions of my life in the grotto.
Yeah. Oh, don't go into the grotto, man. I peeked in there, and it was like, imagine the dirtiest hot tub you could ever be in your life, covered in this sort of ugly paper mache. Right. You can make it in your backyard. Get a hot tub, and then like make a paper mache roof for it, and then don't clean it for 20 years. That's the grotto, And then put like, 30 or 40 men in there that are all between the ages of 40 and 60. And one girl that like is getting, manhandled. Yeah, a lot of attention. That's the grotto. Oh.
Thank you for ruining my...
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, that's what I do. That's part of being a journalist is ruining people's dreams.
Presenting the truth at all costs.
Yeah. So getting sent to the Playboy Mansion was cool. Going to Japan was pretty cool, And then I got sent to a few other things. I got sent to like the first women's... It was like in Evansville, Indiana. Like I saw Misha Tate get KO'd in her like first or second MMA fight by Caitlin Young. And, it was pretty neat. So anyway, Bodog sent me to a lot of places. And then, like a ship staffed entirely by rats, it was chewed to pieces and it sank.
When you were doing those predictions back in the day...
Yeah, I still do them a little bit, but not so much anymore.
How accurate are they? Have you ever taken a look at your track record?
They used to be like weirdly accurate. Like my 90%, 100%. Because back in the day, I mean, you know
shark
how
and
it was.
goldfish.
Yeah, I mean, when a jiu-jitsu guy fights a karate guy, the jiu-jitsu guy is going to win, right? But then later, before they made headbutts illegal, if it's Mark Coleman versus a jiu-jitsu guy or whoever, the wrestler's going to take the jiu-jitsu guy down and then just headbutt him until they give him a decision,
Right.
But then they made headbutts illegal, and now they've added more and more and more rules, and the fighters have all started doing...
They're all cross-training.
So the question back in the day was, which is the best style? And that's an easy question to answer. Right? And so...
Now it's who's the best fighter.
Now and they're doing things behind the scenes that you and I and the fans aren't privy to whatsoever. Like, God knows what Ronda Rousey was doing during her year off. She fought, Holly Holm, and then she had a year off, and I totally incorrectly assumed she was...
Training?
Addressing some of the issues she had with strikers that keep her at range, and evidently she wasn't. So that last UFC I got almost completely wrong because it's no longer style versus style anymore. It's now athlete versus athlete, and to a certain extent,
game plan versus
game plan, and pharmaceutical versus pharmaceutical.
I'm glad we both hit upon that at the same time.
You don't know what they're doing, and the UFC does their like UFC embedded or whatever, but then you just see them sitting around in their hotel room talking about what shoes they like to buy or how much they love Reebok or whatever. Like it's very hard to see what really is going on behind that curtain. So my my percentage accuracy has gone way down since then because a lot of the answerable questions have been answered.
Right.
You know?
Stuff like at an elite level like that, everybody's injured.
Oh, yeah. And that's the other thing, yeah.
Yeah, like
you don't know what injuries they've gotten, but they're still taking the fight.
Yeah.
And then afterwards they, oh, well, I have no MCL in my knee, my ACL.
And I had the flu.
Yeah, I had the flu. And they all make, when they lose, they make excuses.
Let's even take that at face value. Let's say that they really did have a torn MCL and the flu.
And a lot of them do.
Sure.
But you have to take the fight to get the money to pay their mortgage or whatever, you know?
Exactly.
So...
Yeah, that would actually be, they show the statistics at the beginning of the fight. Height, weight, age, reach.
And a lot of that is wrong. Like, I've met GSP. I've met Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva is giant. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that he fought at 170 back in the day in Pride is crazy. Because now he's like, I don't know, he's like 6'3", and probably walks around at 220. You know? My story about meeting Anderson Silva is also on my Cellular blog. You know? He's giant. I've met GSP too. He's quite short. He's like up to my shoulder, you know? So he's like 180 centimeters by my estimation. Maybe he was, I don't know, maybe either standing in a pit or, I could be wrong on that too. Everything I say might be totally inaccurate. Anything I say, just follow it with everything Jeff says could be totally inaccurate. Jeff might be wrong. About Brazil, about height, about fighters, all of this stuff is
you have been concussed a few times.
Yeah, no kidding. So I might be dreaming right now. So, So if any of you write into Stephan and say, your guest Jeff was a total idiot, I'm willing to entertain that philosophy,
Yeah. I think the injury part of it, you've got all those statistics, which may be wrong. But the statistics I'd really like to see is like, okay, what's the list of injuries that fighter A has? What's the list of injuries fighter B has? Like left arm only extends, to 85 degrees. All right, that changes the dynamics of the fight.
And that's something else people have only lately discovered about preparing for mixed martial arts fights is that maybe you shouldn't be sparring like pit bulls in the academy.
Yeah.
People were making fun of Conor McGregor for having the pool noodles thing going on, but you can't get a concussion getting cracked with a pool noodle. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And now guys like Forrest Griffin or whoever, maybe Chuck Liddell, are saying, man, I wish I'd done less sparring back in the day because, forgetting my kids' names kind of stinks.
Yeah. And even more direct to their career, getting a glass jaw really stinks.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Chuck Liddell, we have to remember one of his last fights in the UFC, got knocked out by a guy with a broken arm with a punch from that broken arm.
Who was that?
Rich Franklin. So it just goes to show how much your brain can only take a certain number of punches.
Yeah.
There's a bullet out there with your name on it.
Yeah.
There's, your brain can take 999 punches, but it can't take punch number 1,000. At that point, your brain is not jello, but
close to.
It doesn't take a very big hit to knock you out.
It's funny that Rich Franklin was the guy that, did that to Chuck Liddell, because he was also the guy that, every now and then you see the passing of a torch, you know what I mean? And Rich Franklin was the guy that took the torch not just from Chuck Liddell, but also Ken Shamrock. Like back in the day, Rich Franklin knocked out Ken Shamrock with a very weird, highly suspicious thing that, from certain angles, doesn't even seem to connect. And some people say, oh, well, that was a work or whatever. I don't think it was. I think Shamrock took so much damage over his career to his head and whatever that there's certain guys like Marvin Eastman, for example. Marvin the Beastman Eastman?
Yeah.
He looked like an absolute nightmare, I met him, a really nice guy, but he just took too many shots.
What'll be interesting is there's sort of three cohorts. Cohort number one beat the living crap out of each other while training early in their career and continued beating the living crap out of each other as they went up in their career. Wanderlei Silva, for example. You hear stories about shoot box, doing full contact sparring with little tiny MMA gloves 3 days before a Pride fight.
Right.
So that's hard sparring early in their career and then hard fighting and hard sparring late in the career. The next cohort that we're talking about did a lot of hard fighting early.
Yeah.
And now they've laid off. I don't do sparring anymore at this point. All I do is hit the pads.
Right. I think Robbie Lawler's saying that now.
Yeah.
I think.
And he had brawls from hell.
Right. Oh, yeah. Good Lord.
But it'll be interesting to see if the next cohort never does hard sparring and is successful. Right. I'm not convinced it'll work.
I think Conor McGregor is maybe along those lines because I don't think that dude throws down super hard. And I think Ronda Rousey sort of experimented with that idea, and it didn't really work out too well for her because maybe she went a little bit too light. And again, this is all just highly theoretical theory on my part. I don't have any.
No, we got to see a whole bunch of fighters come through, but I don't know if we'll ever see the guys coming through who haven't gone through a period of hard sparring to learn to take a punch.
Well, that's just it. I mean, in order to swim, you got to get in the water.
Mm.
You can't learn to swim without getting wet, you know?
Yeah.
And like,
So maybe is light sparring early in your career enough?
right.
We don't know.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see 5 years from now.
But getting back on the point of actual jujitsu or whatever, which we were talking about some time ago, there seem to be also academies where people spar like lunatics, people spar recreationally, and there's some where there's very little or no sparring as white belts. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And each one has its own benefits and disadvantages. You know, like clubs where people spar like Wolverines all the time, people are going to be very tough, but you're not going to have a lot of influx into your club, and people are going to get injured a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the recreational one in the middle is kind of like, you know, people are sparring enough to develop some skills, but it's not total pussification, for the lack of a better term. But then there's the other one where people are just doing technique and there's no sparring whatsoever. And that,
In my opinion, they might as well be doing traditional karate.
right, yeah, it's tradition.
I mean, the techniques are a little bit more combative.
Right.
I grant you that.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
sparring it against resistance.
And the thing is, like, I've trained with people like that do the techniques but don't spar, and they can't, they know how to do their techniques against a compliant opponent or one that is simulating resistance, but against a truly resistant opponent,
Different kettle of fish.
they can't do that stuff at all, not even a little bit. And it is a surprise to them that they can't do it, because simulating reality and reality are not the same thing. You know what I mean? So I try when I, teach or whatever I think out at the community center to have that sort of middle thing where it's like, it's hard enough that you're developing skills, but it's not so hard that you're going to get injured or you're going to get, or we're going to have like no influx into the club because it's going to freak everybody out to see, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's happening,
That whole, all the clubs that have the workout's not over till there's blood on the floor attitude, which I have trained at.
Yeah, me too.
There tends to be a very small group of core guys. And it makes sense. Like, if we're going to train that hard, I don't want it to be with some random dude.
Right.
Because I want that, if I get injured, I want to get injured by a friend.
Yeah. Well, with a friend, you're much less likely to be injured. Like your worst injuries, you know what I mean?
Beginners.
It's generally like jiu-jitsu means the gentle art in Japanese, right? And if you and I are black belts in the gentle art, so we know how to be gentle. But against a huge, strong, spazzy white belt, he has no idea how to be gentle. And the crazy thing is, in his head, he sees the black belt that you and I are wearing, and he thinks that we're going to hurt him. He thinks that since we're these ninjas, that he's the one in danger, and then he gets all like amped up, like he's like alone with a cougar in a small room, and he's like, he gets all fired up, and he comes.
Cougar the cat, not Cougar.
Yeah, no, not Cougar the old sexy lady, Cougar the cat.
Okay.
Like from Talladega. Remember, have you seen Talladega Nights where Ricky Bobby has to get in the car with the bobcat with the mountain lion? I mean, like that. And their heart starts going, and then they leap at you like a Wolverine full of cocaine. And now you and I are the ones who are in danger, because all of a sudden we're getting attacked by someone that thinks they are in danger, when in fact we are black belts in the gentle art. We're not going to hurt them. We're not going to hurt each other. We've been hurt before. We know how much it sucks, So all of my worst injuries have been against either huge new people or people with whom I'm not very familiar, and no one else is secretly, I learned later that no one else will roll with that person. And that I didn't know it.
Or the magic words, which everybody lives, hey, let's just go light.
Let's go light. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, there's a 50% chance that the guy's going to go light, and a 50% chance that the guy will wait until he's in a slightly advantageous position and then pick you up and drop you on your head.
Years ago, there was a guy in a school I trained at who said to this, he was a huge guy, he's probably like 250, 260. And he said, let's go light, this other little guy who was probably like 150. And then after he said, let's go light, the big guy picked the little guy up. He made him turtle, and then he grabbed him by the collar and by the belt, and he picked him up, and he threw him into kind of a desk, and he went over the desk and wiped the telephone off the top of the desk. And that's what he did after he said, let's go light. And then he laughed about it afterwards. He thought that was quite funny. He threw him over a desk.
I will call that a failure of the educational system. At that point, the instructor...
this is something else we've talked about lately. I wrote a little article about it. When should you kick someone out of your club? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When someone's behaving like that and then laughing about it, gone.
Yeah.
Cleanliness, dangerous.
Yeah, you wrote that
crazy.
article for Grapplearts, how to get kicked out of your BJJ club.
Right. Yeah.
That a whole bunch of people took seriously.
Yeah, they thought it was a step-by-step guide, and they're like, why would you do this? Why not be a gentleman and just give your 30 days notice? No. It was sarcastic. It was do none of these things.
What were some of the things you if you want to get kicked out of your club,
don't wash your kimono.
Ever, yeah.
Don't ever wash your kimono and ball it up like a little, cashew nut and hide it under something, and then the next day come back and put it on.
Ferments.
Yeah, don't even take it home. Just sweat in it and then ball it up somewhere. That's a good one. Be super, super rough. Hurt people. There was a guy I trained with, the last time I trained with him, he hurt 5 people in one class.
Well, that's
he popped record. My arm, he popped another guy's arm, 2 legs and a neck in one class. And that was above his average, but he should have been booted. Never got booted, So dirty, dangerous, disrespectful. You know what I mean? I'm sure you've seen this before where like a student will he'll see a technique and then he'll whisper in someone, that stuff doesn't work. I'll show you the real stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. So dirty, dangerous, disrespectful, and then just maybe refusing to pay. Because all jiu-jitsu clubs at the end of it are a business. Right. Some people have this idea these days that jiu-jitsu should be free and that paying for it is like asking someone to pay for air or gravity. Yeah. You know what I mean? So yeah, dirty, dangerous, disrespectful, and cheap, I guess. Or a combination thereof.
If you did make it free for them, then they'd be like, man, unless you come pick me up at my home, right? Yeah, I'm not going to come train.
Yeah.
Unless you come pick me up at my home and buy me dinner afterwards. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a guy I used to train with, and he didn't have many submissions, but his signature submission was to open his gi. He had a big, hairy chest.
Oh, Jesus.
And to essentially jam his man boob into the mouth of people and hug their head.
He would make you nurse.
Yeah. He essentially forced nursing on a hairy man boob and smothering.
Yeah. And that's why I tell all my guys, to wear a rash guard under their kimono.
No, this would have interfered with this would have interfered with this technique. And I can't count the number of guys that one guy made quit.
Yeah, right.
So from a financial point of view, the instructor was really silly. Right. It was like, I can't get rid of him because he pays his dues every month.
Yeah.
Well, the opportunity cost is there that there's 5 other people who've been happy to pay you every month who are now no longer there because they were so sickened to the pit of their stomach by what it so traumatized by what had happened. I was very lucky that I knew that this was this guy's MO. So it very much changes your jiu-jitsu. Forget about jiu-jitsu being like to defend against punches. The whole point of that role was to not let him get both hands around the back of my head and his chest anywhere near my face.
I trained with a guy who told me straight up that he learned all his techniques from watching the WWE, or WWF, and I don't mean World Wildlife Federation, I mean like pro wrestling. And his go-to move was slamming. He was like a power lifter or something, and he would from your guard just try and lift you up and hit you on the mat. He would try and stand up and slam you on the mat. Like he was basically trying to, his perfect idea was to get Rampage Jackson versus Ricardo Arona on you, just slam you. That was his game. And nobody ever kicked him out of the academy because back then it was this crazy place where nobody got the boot. I don't know, it was nuts, and you just had to but as insane as it was now, if I were to get in a real street fight with somebody, so they don't have a knife or a pointed stick or something, I'd be like, I've faced worse than this. When you've done jiu-jitsu against all these incredibly dangerous people trying to hurt you and kill you, it makes you ready for anything.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, Jeff. Now that we are reiterated how ready for anything we are.
There you go.
We're going to head forth into the cold, cruel world and avoid people who slam us and maybe jump to a flying heel hook if we ever get attacked.
Indeed.
I think that's what
that was our conclusion.
Yeah.
That's the conclusion of this verbal essay is, avoid flying guard and heel hooks or people that do that to you.
And you're going to work on taking your students and dividing them in groups of 2.
Yep.
And so that you get experience as a coach, you're going to just let them go full MMA against each other.
In a field or on a sandy area.
Well, you'll have to do multiple iterations. We'll have to
test it.
Yes. And then you need multiple, you can't just draw anything from one test. You need multiple tests.
It's an ongoing series of tests.
That was the end of Jeff's club. So, jeffjitsu.com?
That's my blog, yep. And then where I teach is westvanbjj.com. That's the community center in West Vancouver.
And also you occasionally write for Grapplearts?
Yes.
People go to Grapplearts and do a search for Jeff Meszaros?
Yep.
Meszaros?
That's me. That means a meat cutter in Hungarian.
Oh, wow. That's a badass name.
I know. Jeff the Butcher. Yep.
Jeff the Butcher.
Yep. Well, thanks very much for having me.
It was awesome. Hope to have you back soon.
Indeed.